Once upon a time, in a village called Omasi, there lived a generous man named Omema. Omema was known as a wealthy and a generous man. In Omasi village, Omema was popularly known for his reply each time people calls his name. If Omema helps you and you thank him, he will reply with Omema na-emere onwe ya, which means he that do good does it for himself. As a young man, Omema developed the habit of giving without expecting anything in return. He believed that whatever good a person does, he or she did it for himself or herself. Omema continued his act of giving even at his old age. Omema's name became very popular in the village, not because of his wealth, but because of his response anytime any of the villagers greets him or thank him for the good things he did. During his youth, Omema got married to Olamma, the most beautiful maiden at the time. She bore 3 sons for Omema. The family of 5 were lived in peace and harmony, and Omema made sure that he does everything in his power to provide for his family. Olamma and her sons lived a very comfortable life in Omema's house. When she got married to Omema, Olamma noticed his constant act of giving, and she did not waste time in emulating her husband's character. The couples will buy lots of foodstuffs and then share to the villagers. Sometimes, they will prepare a large feast for the poor, who will gather to enjoy themselves, and then they will thank and pray for him. And Omema will always reply in his usual way, he that do good does it for himself. The 3 sons of Omema grew up into a very handsome young men. Their handsomeness always marvels the young maidens of the village, and they always gape at these 3 young men anytime they pass. The women of the village wish that their daughters will marry into the household of Omema, and so the competition on who will win the young men's heart began. And so mothers will cook delicious food, give to their daughters to take to Omema's sons in order to win their heart. It continued like this, and no day will pass without the maidens of the village not bringing gifts to Omema's house. Omema's 3 sons became lazy and arrogant as the gifts and praises from the maidens and women of the village began to enter their heads. Omema's 3 sons began to misbehave seriously. Their characters and behaviors became so bad that the villagers began to wonder how 2 wonderful couples like Omema and Olamma could beget such terrible sons. Omema has a young nephew called Soshima, whom he has been training from childhood. Soshima lost his parents at a tender age, and since then, Omema has been the one raising him. Soshima's character was a huge contrast to Omema's 3 sons. While Omema's sons were lazy, self-centered, and arrogant, Soshima was hardworking, selfless, and humble. And because of his good character, the villagers began to praise and adore him. When Omema's sons saw that the villagers are now channeling their love and adoration to Soshima, they became jealous of him and also developed hatred towards him. But Soshima was unaware of the jealousy and hatred growing in the hearts of his cousins. Not long, because of the jealousy and hatred growing in their hearts. The three sons of Omemma began to maltreat their cousin brother Soshima. They began to use his parents' death to mock him, and they even stopped talking to him. Omemma, who noticed the way his sons were treating Soshima, called them one day and began to advise them on their changed attitude towards Soshima. He told his sons that nobody knows tomorrow. Therefore, they should always treat people with love and respect. Omemma, after advising his sons, noticed that instead of them changing, rather they got worse. So, Omemma called Soshima. He advised and encouraged him not to stop being nice and good to people, no matter how they treat him. On that fateful day, as Omemma's three sons and Soshima were returning from the farm, they saw a young maiden who was dressed in a dirty attire and was sitting on the road. When they wanted to pass the maiden, she called on to them to please help her lift her water pot. Soshima tried to help the maiden, but his cousins began making jest of him. They laughed at him, telling him how foolish he was for trying to help the ugly maiden. Soshima was not stopped by their mockery. Rather, he went ahead to help the maiden. Many weeks after the incident between the maiden, Soshima, and Omemma's son, the king of Omasi announced that all the young men of the village should gather at the village square during the next Nkwo market day. It was announced that on that day, the beautiful princess of Omasi village will choose a husband for herself, and it was declared that whomever the princess chooses will be the heir to the throne of Omasi, for the king has no son that will rule after him. The announcement brought an uproar to the village, and so the young men of Omasi began to prepare for the big day. Meanwhile, Soshima, who has become friend with the maiden he helped on the roadside, was the only young man in the village who was not excited about the king's announcement. He met and fell in love with the young maiden, and so he saw no reason in joining the other young men of the village in trying to win the princess' hand in marriage. But he was persuaded by his maiden to go, for it was a decree from the king that every young man of the village must attend that day. Soshima reluctantly agreed to go, while telling himself that the princess will not notice him amidst other eligible young men. On that fateful day, the young men and the whole villagers all gathered at the village square in anticipation of who is going to be the next king of Omasi and to see their beautiful princess. For the princess of Omasi was rarely seen by anyone. When it was time for the princess to choose her husband, instead of a very beautiful, well-dressed maiden, rather a young maiden who was dressed in a dirty cloth came out. The whole villagers were surprised, and to their shock, the young maiden walked to where Soshima was. She held his hand and then took him to the king. The king, who then explained to the villagers that his daughter, in order to find a good man, disguised herself as a commoner. He told the people that while acting as a commoner, that his daughter begged many of the young men of the village to help her, but none of them helped her except Soshima. Soshima and the other young men of the village could not believe that the young maiden whom they met at the roadside was actually the princess of their village. Omemma's three sons began to regret mocking Soshima and the maiden. They all wished that they had helped the young maiden that day. Soshima and the princess got married and he came to live at the palace as a prince. Omemma and Aolamma were so happy for Soshima. Omemma later called his three sons and advised them to emulate the good character of Soshima. He reminded them of how Soshima's character and kindness has placed him in the position of a prince and the next king of their village. Starting from that day, Omemma's sons learnt their lesson and they stopped being arrogant and proud, for they realized that the good of a man surely has a way of returning back to him. The moral lesson of this story teaches us to always be good and kind to other people